You fake. You pretended to be pregnant just to steal the house, and then you had the nerve to throw all my things out into the yard. You're the real garbage here. You made the mistake of thinking I was someone you could walk over.
I've been quietly collecting every piece of evidence, tearing apart every lie, and now it's your turn to sit in a cell and eat prison food inside four walls. This is the story of how I took back justice, dignity, and the self-respect of a mother. My name is Evelyn Harris, 67 years old, a dark-skinned woman from a quiet suburb in southern Atlanta. That day, the sky mourned with me. I had just said goodbye to Sarah, the only sister I had left in this world. The road home felt endless. The familiar streets suddenly seemed foreign, heavy with sorrow. The cold afternoon wind caught the edge of my black morning dress, wrapping it around my legs as if trying to hold me back. All I wanted was to return home, to sit in silence and let grief flow through me. But when I opened the iron gate, my heart stopped. The front yard was a disaster. Broken picture frames scattered across the wet grass, my old dresses thrown in a heap, letters from Sarah, ones we wrote as children, soaked and torn under the drizzle. The wooden chair my late husband built for me, the only thing I had kept for 40 years, snapped in half, lying crooked in the mud. I froze. My trembling hand dropped the funeral flowers I was still holding. The world around me shattered all at once. Then the door opened, and Tanya, my daughter-in-law, stepped out. She wore a tight red dress, hair perfectly curled, her face made up like she was going to a party. Amid the wreckage, her beauty looked harsh, almost cruel. She raised an eyebrow and said sweetly, but hollowly, "We cleaned up, Mother. Those old things, they were just trash." Trash. That word slipped from her mouth so lightly, yet it stabbed straight into my heart. I looked around and saw my life torn apart, and the woman standing before me was the wife of my son. I lifted my head and looked her dead in the eyes. For a second, I saw something contempt, satisfaction, maybe even joy at my pain. My voice was low, every word deliberate. "You call my life trash? Then you'll see who the real trash is." The air went still. Somewhere a crow cawed, splitting the silence like a blade. Tanya only shrugged, turned her back, and walked inside, leaving the door half open. The wind slipped through the crack, sighing long and cold. I knelt down and began picking up my things. A photo of Sarah and me at graduation, the wool scarf my mother had knitted, my old recipe book. Mud and rain smeared my hands, but I kept gathering, wiping, saving, as if by doing so I could piece my life back together. When I looked up across the street, beneath the old oak tree, a man was standing there. He wore a long gray coat with the collar turned up, his face hidden in the dim light. He didn't move. He just watched me with eyes that seemed to know me. I took a step forward, but a car passed by, and when I looked again, he was gone. A chill ran down my spine, as if I had brushed against a memory I wasn't supposed to remember. That night, the house was silent. Marcus, my son, wasn't home. Tanya went upstairs early, and I sat alone in the dark storage room. The smell of damp wood and old sorrow filled the air. I looked at the dirt still on my hands. It felt like I was holding my own humiliation. Then a noise outside. I went to the porch. The weak yellow light from the lamp flickered over the yard. Something was wedged in the mailbox, a brown envelope. No name, no stamp. My heart raced as I pulled it out. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Don't trust them." It all began in 1991. No signature, no clue. I stood there, hands shaking, staring as the ink blurred under the porch light. 1991, the year my sister bought this house. I looked up the empty street. The wind rustled the dry leaves. And far away under the streetlight, I thought I saw him again, the man in the gray coat watching me. That night I couldn't sleep. In the darkness, every memory, every doubt, every wound circled in my head. But I knew one thing for sure. The storm had only just begun, and I, Evelyn Harris, would not let anyone, not my daughter-in-law, not the devil himself, bury my life ever again. The next morning, Tanya called me into the living room. Her voice was as sweet as sugar, but her eyes were cold as steel. She said, "Mother, we need to clear out the master bedroom to make space for the baby. You wouldn't mind moving down to the storage room in the yard, would you? Just temporarily." I looked at her, lips pressed together. I said nothing, only nodded. Temporarily. Those two words sounded like an insult. That storage room used to be where I kept old, damp things, a place no one could live in. But if she wanted to shove me there, let her think she'd won. I kept my silence, though something began to churn inside me, bitter and alert. At noon, I carried my bag down to the yard room. The wooden door was old. The rusty hinge screeched as it opened. A musty smell hit me, the walls streaked with green mold, the floor layered with dust and cobwebs. The little room had a narrow window half covered by a torn curtain. I set my bag down and looked around. Memories flooded in. Dust-covered old items, cardboard boxes piled in the corners, the remains of my life that Tanya hadn't yet thrown away. I began to sort through things bit by bit. A breeze came in through the window, bringing cold and the scent of damp earth. When I pulled a heavy box out of a corner, the lid popped open and a stack of papers spilled out. I bent down to gather them, and my heart stopped. They were bank statements with my name on them, but the withdrawals were unfamiliar. I studied each line and figure. Many regular withdrawals paid to unknown recipients, totaling over $50,000. I remembered every penny in that account. That money was the last of our savings after my husband died. Now it was gone without a trace. I sank into a chair, my head spinning. Who had done this? I had never given anyone access to my account, except the one time Marcus helped me check it when my hand hurt. Marcus would never do something like this. Tanya. The thought flashed like lightning across a dark sky. She was always talking about the baby, the future, a bigger house. Had she been preparing her future with my money? I folded the statements and tucked them into an old drawer. Fear, anger, and shame washed over me. Then my hand found another box, and among the old papers a thick envelope. No sender name, only stains, and the smell of long-standing damp. I opened it. Inside was an old photograph, yellowed at the edges, the corners frayed. In the photo, my sister Sarah was smiling. Beside her stood a tall man in a gray coat, slightly leaning toward the camera. They were standing in front of this house, the house I was now being pushed out of and made to live in a storage room. On the back of the picture, in a rubbed blue ink, someone had scrolled S 1991. I sat frozen. 1991, the year Sarah bought this house, before she transferred it to me a few years later. But who was the man in the photo? I had never met him, never heard Sarah mention him. The way he looked at her in the picture, it wasn't just friendship. There was an intimacy there, something left unsaid. I placed the photo on the table and peered through the small window. The sky had grown heavy. Dark clouds were gathering. A strong wind made the old curtain flutter. I remembered last night, the man in the gray coat standing across the street. A cold dread rose in my chest. Who was he? Why had he appeared the same night I was humiliated? I whispered, "Someone is trying to remind me of something, but what?" Rain pounded the porch roof like a frantic heartbeat. I opened the desk drawer, took out my phone, snapped a photo of the picture, then photographed the bank statements as well. Each image became a piece of evidence, a step in a fight I was likely about to begin. I sat in the dark with only a sliver of daylight from the window lighting Sarah's photograph. My sister's face was full of life in the picture, her smile gentle, as if unaware of the shadows I now faced. But deep down, I knew this photo had not appeared by accident. Someone had deliberately left it a message. When the rain eased, I went out onto the porch. The gray sky felt eerily still. I scanned the yard, no one in sight. Yet in that moment, I felt watched, an intense gaze from somewhere in the darkness. I held the photo tightly, my hand shaking. I was no longer the frail woman Tanya assumed I was. I would find the truth, however deeply it was buried. And if the past had come back knocking, I would open the door and face it, to learn why everything began in 1991. That night, I did not sleep. Wind threaded through the window frame. Insects chirped. My heart hammered. Somewhere out there, I believed someone still watched me. The man in the gray coat in the photograph, in the dark, and in the memory that would not rest. The next morning, the sky was a dull, dusted gray. I sat on the old chair in the storage room, my eyes heavy from sleeplessness. On the table lay the stack of papers. I'd gathered the bank statements, the old photo, the brown envelope, silent like the bones of the past. I knew it was time for real answers. I took out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, Attorney Mendez. He was the lawyer who'd helped Sarah and me buy this house over 30 years ago. His voice over the line was low and steady, like it used to be, and somehow that steadiness calmed me. "Mendez, I need your help," I said, doing my best to keep calm, though my grip on the phone was tight. "I want to know who actually holds the title to this house." There was a pause on the other end, pages rustling. Then he spoke slowly, each word measured. "Your name is still on the title, Evelyn. The house is legally yours." I stopped breathing for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I just checked the system," Mendez said. "All those transfer papers you signed were temporary authorizations, not permanent conveyances. You never lost ownership. The house is still registered to Evelyn Harris." I closed my eyes and breathed out. In that instant, a chill ran up my spine, not from fear, but from awakening. This house I'd cared for, these memories had never truly been taken from me. They'd been obscured by layers of lies someone built. "Good," I said quietly, my voice sharp as a blade. It's time they remembered that. After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Morning light filtered through the little window and fell across Sarah's photo and the gray-coated man's gaze. I turned the photo over. His look seemed to bore into me deep and inscrutable. Then a thought struck me. I remembered Mendez mentioning an odd witness signature on the authorization papers. I could hear his voice flipping through pages. "There's a witness signature here. Strange. The name looks like A. Gray." I startled. A. Gray? That was the same name scribbled on Sarah's photo. A shiver ran through me. Why did that name appear in my legal papers? Coincidence or part of a secret buried for more than 30 years? I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the old land records. The ink had faded, but the phrase "certified by A. Gray" was still visible in the corner. The handwriting was decisive and formal, the mark of someone familiar with legal procedure. My heart raced. If he was here, maybe he knows what Tanya is hiding. I wondered whether Tanya knew Arthur Gray, whether she'd found those documents and learned that the house had never really belonged to Marcus or her. If she knew, she'd had reason to hide it, to pretend everything was hers. I stepped outside for a deep breath of cold air. Pale light reflected off the wet ground in faint glimmers. The house that had been my shelter for so many years looked different now, not a refuge, but a battlefield. I was no longer the woman pushed aside. I was the rightful owner who had been denied her claim, but who still stood. I climbed the steps and opened the door. The house was quiet. Soft music played from Tanya's room. The living room was tidy but sterile, like a hotel. Marcus and Tanya's wedding photo sat on the table in a polished silver frame. Tanya's smile in it was beautiful and empty, and it made me shiver. I said nothing. I reached for the bundle of land papers Tanya had hidden away in a drawer and slipped them into my bag. Now I had proof and power. That evening, once more, the man in the gray coat appeared across the street. Wind whipped leaves around him, but he stood still watching me. This time, I was not afraid. I stepped onto the porch, and when I neared, he melted back into the shadows, leaving only a small scrap of paper on the step. I bent and picked it up. The shaky handwritten note read, "Sarah believed you would find the truth. Don't stop." I stood in the dark, the little note trembling in my hand. I didn't know who he was or how he knew Sarah's name, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Tanya, it was about my family's past. I lifted my head and looked at the house swallowed by darkness. This place I'd called home had become the starting point of a fight, and I, the woman they thought old, weak, and obedient, would make them remember who truly owned this house. I didn't think Tanya would move so fast. Only 2 days after I learned I was still the legal owner of the house, she organized a family dinner, said it was to bond, to talk about the future. When Marcus called down and told me to be ready, his voice sounded strange, hesitant, awkward. I knew that dinner was not just a dinner. Dusk had just fallen, and the house glowed with a sickly yellow light. Tanya set the table like she was staging a party. Candles, wine glasses, a new tablecloth, and an overpowering scent of perfume. She wore a white dress, hair curled, a bright fake smile that made me look away. Marcus sat at the head of the table, fidgeting with his wine glass, unable to meet my eyes. I sat down, my hand touching my husband's old wooden chair, the only thing left in this house that Tanya hadn't thrown away. The meal began in silence, the only sound the soft clink of cutlery on plates. I felt the words waiting to be said. Tanya spoke first, voice like a breeze. "Mother, I know there've been misunderstandings, but you know the house is changing. Marcus and I are preparing for the baby, and I think it's time for you to have a quieter place." I set my knife down and looked her square in the eye. "A quieter place?" She nodded, smile unchanged. "Yes, Springfield Care Home out in the suburbs. Very nice, clean, quiet. They'll take care of you, no worries." Marcus lowered his head and avoided my gaze. I heard every word as if they were knives. She said it with the skill of someone who'd planned this hypocritical and measured enough to make you want to smash the table. I stayed silent and poured my wine. The dark liquid mirrored my face in the glass, tired but with a small flame still burning inside. As Tanya continued about elder care comfort in the child's future, I opened my bag and took out the file Mendes had lent me. I laid it gently in the center of the table, right in front of her. She paused, brow knitting. "What's this, Mother?" I smiled, my voice low and clear. "These are the house papers, the real papers. This house." I tilted my head. "You sold my things and called them trash, but that trash is still the owner of this house." The air froze. The candle flakes popped like a metronome counting down heavy seconds. Marcus lifted his head, mouth opening to speak, then closing again. Tanya stared at the file, then at me, panic flickering across her face before she smoothed it into calm. Don't misunderstand. I only misunderstand. I cut in, my gaze locked on her. I understand perfectly, Tanya. You calculated every step from tossing my things into the yard to pushing me into the storage room. You thought I was old, weak, and would quietly disappear. But you forgot the house still bears my name. Marcus sighed and buried his face in his hands. Mother, don't make a scene. We only want what's best for you. Best for me? I turned to my son, pain stabbing my chest. By kicking me out of my own home? Tanya put her glass down. The clink was harsh. Mother, we're not kicking you out. But you must understand, we need space for Marcus and me, for the baby. The baby. I smiled a bitter smile and repeated softly, You mean the child you always talk about? For a moment, tension flickered across her face. Then she recovered her confident air. Yes, our baby. You can't understand being a first-time mother. No, maybe I understand better than you think, I interrupted. Silence settled like a blanket over the table. I knew I'd touched a raw nerve. I looked down at the file and flipped to a page revealing Owner Evelyn Harris. The old certificate slightly blurred ink but clear. Tanya glanced and her eyes shifted from cold to venomous. How long have you had these papers? Long enough to know who should be leaving, I answered. No one spoke further. Only the clock on the wall ticked dry, measured beats counting down to an explosion. Marcus looked at Tanya, then at me, his face torn. I was about to stand when my phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen flashed. A message from an unknown number read, Don't trust them. It all began in 1991. I froze. That year when Sarah was still alive. I glanced at Tanya. She tried to act normal, but I noticed her hand trembling under the table. My grip tightened on the phone, my heart racing. I pocketed the phone and stared at Tanya. Are you sure you know everything about this house? She didn't answer. I turned to Marcus, speaking slowly. Son, there are family secrets you don't know. And when you learn them, you'll have to ask yourself, whom did you really marry? I left the table and walked outside. Behind me, I heard a chair topple and Tanya call after me, but I kept going. The night had fully closed, wind gusted, carrying the smell of rain and distant thunder. I opened the door and stood in the yard beneath the dim streetlight. Across the street in the dark, the man in the gray coat stood again, silent, ghost-like. This time, I felt no fear. I only nodded lightly, as if I understood what he wanted to say, and I knew this was only the beginning. After that dinner, the atmosphere inside the house shifted completely. Tanya no longer pretended sweetness. The cruelty in her eyes showed through like an angered snake. She said nothing to me all morning, only brushed past with cold looks and a mocking half-smile. I knew I'd struck a nerve, and from now on, this would no longer be a game. At noon, while I sat in the storage room, my phone lost signal. I tried the computer, no Wi-Fi. The kitchen was locked, the fridge fitted with a new padlock. She wanted me to feel isolated, to make me know I was an extra in my own home. You cut the internet, lock the food, but you forget I've lived my whole life without them, I muttered to myself and managed a small laugh. I didn't tell Marcus. He was stuck in the middle, poor thing, not strong enough to take my side. It was fine. I was used to fighting alone. The next morning, I left early, wearing my sweater, stepping out into the mist. I went straight to the bank with the old statements I'd kept. The teller looked at me with pity when I told her what I wanted. I'd like to change all passwords, cancel cards, and block any authorized transactions not in my name. "Do you want to freeze the account altogether, Mrs. Harris?" she asked. I nodded firm. "Yes, and notify me if anyone tries to access the account. Someone has been withdrawing funds I never authorized." Signing the receipt, I felt a small but real power return to my hands. Outside the bank, morning light filtered through the trees and flashed off the car windows. I squinted. In that moment, I felt Sarah watching over me. That evening, as night fell, I heard a soft knock on the porch, 3 measured raps. I peered through the crack and saw a man in the dark, an old gray coat, collar turned up, silver hair glinting in the light. My heart raced when I opened the door. "Mrs. Evelyn Harris?" he asked in a low, hoarse voice. "Yes," I said, holding the doorframe. "My name is Arthur Gray," he said, tilting his head slightly. "I used to work for Sarah. She told me that if anything happened, to find you." The name hit me like a bell. Arthur Gray, the name I'd seen in the papers, in the photograph, in my sleepless dreams. I opened the door wider and let him in. Under the yellow lamp, his face showed deep wrinkles, sad but sharp eyes, the bearing of someone who'd seen far more than most should. "I don't understand," I said. "You worked for Sarah." Where Arthur set a leather briefcase on the table and sat opposite me. I was a financial advisor back then. Sarah asked me to review the accounts when someone tried to alter the house's ownership. She was terrified, said a relative was plotting to take everything. I held my breath. "Who?" He looked at me heavy with meaning. "She didn't say, only someone closer than I thought. She gave me documents to keep. I kept them for years until I saw your name again in the old legal files." He opened the case and produced a brown envelope, the very one I'd found in the storage room. Inside was a thick packet. I opened it, my heart squeezing at the familiar lines. Transfer records, transactions, under the name T. Harris. "This is financial proof," Arthur said evenly. "Someone forged authorizations, used your name to siphon money. The system's been manipulated for a long time." I scanned the pages, eyes glued to the numbers. The withdrawals matched the statements I'd held. "When did she start doing this?" I asked, voice trembling. "About a year ago," Arthur replied, "right after she married your son." Lead hung in the room. I felt pulled back to the beginning. Tanya's honeyed voice, her friendly eyes, that sweet smile. All an act, a performance. "I can't believe it," I whispered. "Did Sarah know?" Arthur's expression fell. "She knew, but couldn't do anything in time. Before she died, she left a message. If Evelyn finds out, tell her not to trust anyone, especially those inside the house." I repeated, "Don't trust anyone." He nodded. "Be careful, Evelyn. What you see is only the surface." There was something in Arthur that made me both trust and suspect him. He had come at the perfect time, knew too much, and he carried everything I needed. "Why help me?" I asked. He smiled, his gaze distant. "I owe Sarah a debt, and perhaps I owe you one too." He left late into the night, placing the heavy envelope and a small business card on the table. When the door closed, I watched him fade into the mist. Wind whistled through the cracks and made the paper tremble. I picked it up, read each line again, then sat down clutching Sarah and Arthur's faded photograph. Outside, rain began to fall steady, like the counting of something approaching. Inside me, fear had been replaced by a cold clarity. If Tanya thought I would step back, she was wrong. From now on, I would be the hunter. 3 days after meeting Arthur Gray, the air in the house grew heavier than ever. Tanya barely spoke to me, only walked around with her slightly rounded belly, her hand constantly resting on it, as if to prove the baby's existence. Marcus believed her completely. He talked about the little boy who's coming soon, with a soft smile and a hopeful glint in his eyes. The more I watched, the more my anger burned. But anger alone wouldn't save me. I needed the truth. That morning, while I was sweeping the porch, I heard a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find a middle-aged woman, short, nervous, with a face I recognized faintly. She introduced herself quietly. "I'm Beatrice, Tanya's mother." Her voice trembled and her eyes wouldn't meet mine. I silently gestured for her to come in. She sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped, sweat gathering on her forehead. "I know I shouldn't be here," she whispered, "but I can't live with it anymore, watching my daughter do what she's doing." I looked straight at her. "What exactly is she doing?" Beatrice's lips quivered. "Tanya, she can't have children. She had complications after surgery 3 years ago. The pregnancy she told Marcus about, it isn't real." I froze. My fingers went numb. The broom slipped from my grasp. My mind went blank, and then her words came back, echoing like a slow knife cutting through me. "Not real," I repeated. She nodded, tears welling up. She made it all up. She thought if Marcus found out, he'd leave her. And more than that, she wanted this house. She told me that once the baby arrived, everything here would be hers. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. I sat motionless, the room spinning around me. She hadn't just stolen money or property, she'd stolen love, trust, family. She faked a pregnancy to keep Marcus and take this house, I said coldly. Beatrice nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You can hate me if you want, but I had to tell you. Tanya's gone too far. Please stop her before it's too late." I took out my phone, pressed record, and let it run. Every sob, every confession, I captured it all. When Beatrice left, I stood at the window, watching her small figure disappear down the road. The wind blew through the lavender in the yard. I felt no sorrow, only the stillness before a storm. That afternoon, my phone rang. Arthur's voice came through low and urgent. "Evelyn, I have Tanya's real medical records. I got them from the clinic she used to visit. You need to meet me now before they realize." My heart skipped. "Where Maple Street Cafe, back corner, 7 p.m. he said, and hung up. When I arrived, Arthur was already there. He pushed a thick envelope across the table. I opened it, scanning the papers. Medical records, surgical reports, a fertility diagnosis, all under the name Tanya Harris, dated 2022. There was no doubt left. "All of this is legitimate," Arthur said quietly. "I confirmed it with the hospital. She can't get pregnant, Evelyn. Not now, not ever." I stared at the pages, the words blurring, yet each one cutting deep. "She didn't just steal my home," I said slowly. "She betrayed my family." Arthur watched me with an expression that was both pity and admiration. "Now you have what you need, but be careful. A woman like Tanya, she won't go down easily." I folded the documents and slipped them into my bag. Outside, rain began to fall, each drop tapping against the cafe window like a warning. Inside me, there was no fear, only cold, focused resolve. When I left, Arthur remained seated in the dim light, his hands clasped around a cold cup of coffee. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I knew this much: no one could hide the truth from me anymore. That night, the house was quiet. I placed the envelope on the table and looked at the wedding photo of Marcus and Tanya. She was smiling, perfect and proud, her eyes full of deceit. I could now see clearly. I whispered, "You'll pay for this." Thunder rolled outside, lightning flashed across the window. I didn't know what the coming storm would wash away, but I knew one thing: I was no longer the mother banished to the storage room. I was Evelyn Harris, ready to end every lie that dared to live under my roof. I knew it was time to end everything. The secrets, the lies, the endless pretenses. Now only one thing remained: to expose the truth. I sent a message to Marcus and Tanya, my tone calm, almost gentle, just like a mother trying to make peace. Dinner tonight. Let's talk as a family. No winners, no losers, just talk. Marcus replied quickly, a single word. Okay. Tanya didn't respond, but I knew she would come. People who love control never let themselves be left out. I prepared the table, cooked a simple meal, Marcus's favorite beef stew from his childhood. The house was quiet, bathed in a soft yellow glow, but tension hummed beneath the surface. Inside my handbag lay the medical record, the bank statements, and the recorded confession from Beatrice, all lined up like cards I was ready to play. At 7 o'clock sharp, I heard the car outside. Tanya entered first, dressed in a cream-colored dress, her supposed pregnant belly hidden perfectly. Marcus followed behind, exhausted eyes red from lack of sleep. I smiled and gestured for them to sit. Thank you for coming. I wanted us to talk tonight honestly, with nothing left unsaid. Tanya smiled politely, her eyes scanning the room. Of course, Mother. I want peace too, for the baby, for the family. Marcus placed his hand over hers, trying to hold things together. I watched them quietly, my heart aching, but I didn't let emotion show. I poured wine and said slowly, "There are things I've kept silent about for too long, but tonight the truth deserves its place in this house." I placed the file on the table and opened it page by page. These are bank statements, unauthorized withdrawals from my account over the past year. Someone accessed my funds without permission. I looked directly at Tanya. And this is your medical record. She froze. Marcus frowned. What record, Mom? I slid the paper toward them. A doctor's note from 5 years ago. It says Tanya cannot conceive. The pregnancy is fake. Tanya shot to her feet, voice breaking in fury. You're lying. You made this up. You hate me so much. You'd destroy my marriage just to see me gone. I didn't flinch. My voice was cold, steady. If you're truly pregnant, prove it. Let's go to the hospital right now. The room went dead silent. Marcus turned to her, pale as chalk. Tanya, tell me that's not true. She said nothing. Her hands trembled. Her eyes darted around like a trapped animal looking for a way out. I continued my tone, low but sharp. I've given you every chance. I stayed quiet when you threw my belongings onto the lawn. I endured when you locked the kitchen. I bit my tongue when you used my son to manipulate me. But you crossed a line when you turned motherhood something sacred into a lie. You used a child that doesn't exist to chain Marcus and steal this home. Tanya screamed, "No!" I did it for this family. Marcus needs me. I love him. Love? I laughed, a dry, bitter sound. You loved him so much, you forged ultrasound reports, faked doctor messages, and drained my account to pay for your lies. You loved him enough to betray the woman who let you into her home. Marcus pushed his chair back, voice trembling. Tanya, please tell me this isn't true. She didn't answer. Her eyes flicked toward the door. Then the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the thick silence. I stood up, walked to the door. Outside stood a man in a gray coat, calm, composed, his eyes deep and knowing. "Arthur Gray," I said softly. He nodded once. "I came to tell the truth. Sarah wanted you to know." He stepped inside, the light catching the lines of his face. In his hands was a thick folder. He laid it on the table and said evenly, "This is the original medical record." And here, a signed statement from the clinic confirming forged documents. The person who submitted them was Tanya Collins. Marcus froze. Tanya staggered backward, clutching the edge of the table. No, that's not true. Arthur's voice was calm but cutting. She also forged Evelyn's signature to authorize bank transfers. Sarah discovered it before she died. She left me these documents, asking me to deliver them when the time came. The room was utterly still. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. Marcus looked at Tanya, his eyes filled with heartbreak and disbelief. Tanya tried to speak, her voice breaking. "I just wanted—" "Enough," Marcus interrupted, his tone low, final. I stood there watching. The house that had been drowning in lies finally felt heavy with truth. Tanya collapsed into her chair, covering her face, sobbing quietly, but even her tears sounded hollow. Arthur looked at me and nodded. "You see, Evelyn, Sarah was right." Light only enters when we dare to open the darkest doors. I didn't reply. I only looked at the woman who had tried to destroy everything I loved, now sitting among the ruins of her own deceit. It was over, and at last I had reclaimed what they tried to bury, the truth and the dignity of a mother who refused to break. The night exploded with the sound of sirens. Blue and red lights sliced through the darkness, flashing across the windows, painting the walls of the old house with chaos and judgment. Inside, Tanya screamed. Her face went pale, her hands trembled, and her eyes darted between the front door and the people in the room. Marcus froze by the staircase, while Evelyn stood motionless in the living room, calm, cold, and unshaken at the eye of the storm. "This is the police. Open up." The pounding on the door came hard and fast. Marcus opened it, his hand shaking. 2 officers stepped in, voices firm and sharp. "Tanya Harris, you're under arrest for financial fraud, falsifying medical records, and property theft." The words froze the air. Tanya backed up against the wall, eyes wide, lips trembling. "No, you're wrong," she screamed. "I didn't do anything. I'm pregnant. You can't do this to me." One officer began reading her rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court." But Tanya wasn't listening. She turned toward Marcus, desperation breaking her voice. "Marcus, tell them I'm carrying your baby. You can't let them take me." Marcus stepped back, eyes filled with disbelief. "Tanya, tell me the truth. Is any of this real?" "Of course it's real," she sobbed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She tried to pull away, but the officers were faster. Their boots thudded against the hardwood floor as they moved in closer. "Stay still, don't resist," one of them ordered. Tanya struggled harder, screaming, "You have no proof. She set me up." She pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn. "It's her. She's behind all of this." Evelyn didn't move. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm, measured, deadly. "Enough. You called my life trash. Now let's see who's really being taken out." That single line silenced the room. Tanya's face twisted in rage, then panic. She lunged, trying to break free. The officers reacted instantly. One grabbed her wrists, the other pushed her down against the table. The sharp sound of contact echoed through the room, followed by ragged breathing and a clipped command. "Stay down. Don't move." Tanya fought to speak, gasping. "Let me go. I'm innocent. I'm pregnant. You can't." Evelyn interrupted, voice low but sharp as glass. "You're not pregnant, Tanya. We have your medical records. The show's over." The words struck like a knife. Tanya froze, her entire body shaking. The officers clicked the handcuffs around her wrists. Click, that single metallic snap sounding like a verdict. Beatrice, her mother, broke down, collapsing to her knees. My God, Marcus sat in silence, hands over his face, his world collapsing around him. A flashing light spilled through the windows, casting red streaks across Evelyn's face. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile, she simply watched as the officers led Tanya toward the door. Tanya turned one last time, eyes burning with fury and humiliation. "You'll pay for this. You'll—" The door slammed. Her voice was cut off by the wail of sirens fading into the distance. The room fell silent. Beatrice sobbed quietly. Marcus stared blankly at the floor. Evelyn stood still, her shoulders straight, her eyes fixed on the window. The last flicker of blue light brushed across her face, calm, composed, victorious, but not cruel. Arthur stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Sarah once told me you were the strongest woman she'd ever known." Evelyn turned slightly, her voice cold yet weary. "I'm not strong, Arthur. I'm just done being stepped on." Outside, the wind howled across the porch. The smell of rain and iron filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, lightning cracked open the sky, illuminating Evelyn's figure standing tall, alone, unbroken, a living symbol of justice finally served. That afternoon's sunlight streamed through the window soft and golden. The house, silent for days, suddenly felt alive again. The chill of tension was gone. The air no longer carried the weight of anger or deceit. It was just me and Marcus sitting together in the living room, wrapped in the calm of a quiet afternoon. Marcus sat across from me, his eyes red and weary. He had been silent ever since the police took Tanya away. I could see the storm inside him, regret, confusion, and awakening all at once. I didn't say a word. I simply poured tea, the familiar scent filling the room. When I set the cup in front of him, he looked up, eyes glistening with guilt. "Mom," he said, voice trembling, "I'm sorry for being so blind." I looked at him, and in that moment, I no longer saw a grown man, but the little boy I once held in my arms, the same eyes, only more fragile now. I reached over and placed my hand over his, the hand of a mother who had lost much, but endured everything. "Marcus," I said softly, "love isn't closing your eyes while someone walks all over you. When you love someone, you must still be clear-eyed enough to see the truth. Blind love doesn't save anyone, it only destroys the person giving it." His tears fell onto my hand. "I don't know how to make things right, Mom. I've hurt you so deeply. I trusted the wrong person." I smiled, gentle but firm. "Everyone trusts the wrong person at least once, Marcus. What matters is what you do after you realize it. And today, you did the right thing." He looked at me, then his eyes finally showing light again. "I want to fix everything, Mom. The house, it belongs to you. It always has." I said nothing, only nodded. Together, we stood and walked to the desk where Arthur had left the legal documents. When I picked up the pen, my hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from emotion. I signed my name, reclaiming what had always been mine. Marcus signed beside me, his handwriting steady and deliberate. As the ink dried, I felt something lift inside me, a closing of one chapter and the quiet start of another. The house that had once been a battlefield now felt like a home again. Marcus turned to me and took my hand. "Mom, I know I can't erase what's happened, but I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you again." I looked at him with quiet pride and sorrow. "You don't need to promise me that. Just remember what you've learned today. Never let anyone steal your trust again." A breeze drifted through the window, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender, the flowers Sarah once planted outside. The golden light spilled across the table, touching our teacups still warm. I thought of Sarah, of the words she'd written in that old postcard Arthur gave me. Maybe now she was smiling, somewhere at peace, knowing I had finally found mine. Marcus stood and walked to the porch. I followed. We sat side by side on the old wooden chair my husband once built, the same one Tanya had thrown out, now mended and strong again. I ran my hand along the smooth armrest, feeling the warmth of memory. In front of us, the sun was setting. Its orange glow spread across the lawn, bathing the garden in light. Marcus whispered, "It's beautiful, isn't it, Mom? I'd forgotten our house could ever feel this peaceful." I smiled. "You forgot because you lived too long in the dark, Marcus. But the sun, no matter how late, always rises again." We fell silent. Only the faint call of evening birds filled the air as daylight slowly faded from the porch. In that moment, I knew the pain, lies, and loss had finally lifted. We were no longer broken people. We were mother and son found again after the storm. The last light of day wrapped around us soft and warm, like Sarah's embrace from somewhere far away. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt peace bloom quietly inside me, reborn from everything I had survived. That morning's sunlight spilled softly over the garden, glinting off petals still wet with dew. I held a small spade in my hand, the soil damp beneath my fingers, yet my heart felt light. The patch of earth in front of the porch, once torn bare by Tanya, was blooming again as I carefully replanted lavender and white daisies, the flowers Sarah had loved most. The breeze carried the scent of new soil mixed with the sweet fragrance of flowers. Birds chirped on the roof, and the rustling leaves sounded like music, the kind that speaks of life returning. Every motion of my hands, every flower I pressed into the ground felt like stitching back the pieces of a past that had been trampled. Marcus stood on the steps watching me, his voice gentle. "It's beautiful, Mom. I never thought a few flowers could make the whole garden come alive like this." I looked up at him smiling. "It's not the flowers that make it bright, son. It's the truth. When the darkness is gone, everything can bloom again." He nodded and knelt beside me, helping me pat the soil down. Sweat gathered at his temples, but his eyes were calm, full of quiet strength. In that moment, I realized all the pain, betrayal, and loss had become lessons. They no longer chained me, they had freed me. I sat back gazing at the garden. The lavender swayed gently in the wind, as if Sarah herself were smiling somewhere beyond the blue sky. I could almost hear her voice in the breeze, soft, familiar, and warm. "You did it, Evelyn. You held on to what mattered," I whispered back, barely more than a breath. "Yes, I did. I kept my dignity." Her words echoed in my heart, deeper than ever, not just as a memory, but as a truth. They took my peace, my money, my memories, but they never took my dignity. I looked around the house. The cracks in the wall had been painted over. The wooden floor shone clean, and the windows stood wide open, welcoming the sunlight. The house wasn't just legally mine again, it was spiritually mine too. Marcus turned to me, asking softly, "What will you do now, Mom?" I glanced toward the gate where the sunlight poured onto the path. "I'm going to reopen Sarah's garden. I want this place to be somewhere people can come, rest, and find peace. It was her dream once." He smiled, his eyes bright. "You should. She'd be proud, and so am I." I rose, brushed the dirt from my hands, and looked up at the clear sky. The light reflected off the droplets still clinging to the leaves, sparkling like tiny jewels. A deep calm settled over me, the kind I hadn't felt in years. As I turned toward the house, I caught sight of someone standing by the gate. The sunlight glimmered on a familiar gray coat. Arthur Gray. He stood there quietly smiling, that faint, knowing smile. I walked toward him, but before I could reach the gate, he nodded once in farewell and turned away. His figure melted into the golden morning light. I watched him disappear, a wave of gratitude washing over me. Some people walk into our lives not to stay, but to remind us that justice, kindness, and hope still exist. I returned to the garden, picked up the watering can, and let the water run gently over the newly planted flowers. The droplets shimmered under the sun. "It's over, Sarah," I whispered. I kept the house, I kept my son, and I kept myself. In the distance, the church bells rang their chime, floating across the air like a soft benediction. I lifted my face toward the light, eyes narrowing against its brilliance. The little house, the garden, and the flowers all seemed to breathe together in perfect harmony. Peace had returned, not because every wound had healed, but because I had learned to live with them, head held high. My dignity, the one thing they tried to bury, now stood taller than ever. And I knew from this moment on, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning again.